The hidden language of absence. What if the strongest proof that a man misses you is not found in the words he speaks, but in the behaviors he can no longer control? Most people believe that when feelings are real, they naturally become visible through messages, phone calls, or emotional confessions. Yet the human mind rarely works in such a direct way. Carl Jung devoted much of his work to understanding the hidden forces that shape our actions, arguing that the unconscious often reveals what the conscious mind struggles to admit. This is especially true when someone is trying to suppress a meaningful emotional connection. A man may appear composed, productive, and completely focused on his life, while beneath that calm exterior an entirely different psychological process is unfolding. The more he convinces himself that he has moved on, the more his unconscious begins searching for what it believes has been lost. This is not simply about romance or nostalgia. It is about the mind attempting to restore an emotional pattern that once provided meaning, familiarity, and psychological balance. Jung observed that people do not suffer most from what they openly express. They suffer from what they continuously refuse to acknowledge. When genuine attachment remains unresolved, it rarely disappears. Instead, it transforms into subtle habits, unexpected memories, emotional reactions, and decisions that seem irrational even to the person experiencing them. That is why many men become confused by their own behavior after losing someone who truly mattered. They may dismiss a passing thought, only to find it returning with greater intensity. They may avoid every reminder of the past, yet discover that the smallest detail, a familiar fragrance, a particular street, an old photograph, or even a simple phrase, instantly revives emotions they believed had faded. These moments are not signs of weakness. They reveal that the unconscious mind continues processing an unfinished emotional experience. One of Jung's most influential ideas was that whatever remains unresolved within us seeks expression in another form. Emotions that are denied do not disappear. They simply become less visible and more influential. For many men, this creates an internal conflict between the desire to remain emotionally protected and the equally powerful desire to reconnect with what once felt deeply significant. Because pride, fear of rejection, or social conditioning often discourage emotional openness, these feelings rarely emerge through direct communication. Instead, they surface indirectly, shaping attention, behavior, and emotional focus without conscious permission. This explains why a man who genuinely misses someone may not immediately reach out, even though his thoughts repeatedly return to the same person. His silence can become a defense mechanism rather than a reflection of emotional indifference. The mistake most people make is judging feelings only by visible actions, while overlooking the invisible psychological struggle taking place beneath the surface. Jung believed that the unconscious constantly seeks wholeness, and when an important emotional bond has been broken, the psyche naturally begins searching for ways to restore that sense of completeness. This search produces patterns that cannot be hidden forever, no matter how disciplined or emotionally reserved someone appears. There is one particular sign that emerges before any confession is made. Behavior so consistent that it quietly exposes what the heart has been trying to conceal. Understanding this sign changes the way you see silence, distance, and even absence itself, because what appears to be emotional withdrawal may actually be the beginning of the deepest form of longing. In the next part, we will explore the first psychological signal that almost every man unconsciously reveals when missing someone. Becomes impossible to ignore. The first sign, his attention, quietly returns to you. Carl Jung believed that attention is never random. Wherever the mind repeatedly returns, there is usually an unfinished psychological investment beneath the surface. This principle becomes remarkably clear when a man begins missing someone who once occupied an important place in his emotional world. Long before he admits his feelings, his attention starts moving toward you in ways he often fails to notice himself. He may continue living his routine, meeting responsibilities, and appearing emotionally unaffected, yet his inner focus slowly begins orbiting around the memories, symbols, and experiences connected to you. This is because the unconscious does not organize life according to logic alone. It organizes life according to emotional significance. What has deeply affected the psyche naturally demands attention, even when the conscious mind insists on moving forward. You may notice him unexpectedly engaging with something that reminds him of you, revisiting familiar places, listening to music you once shared, or becoming unusually aware of topics that reflect your personality or interests. These actions rarely feel intentional to him. Instead, they emerge as spontaneous choices that seem ordinary on the surface but reveal a deeper psychological pattern. Jung described this tendency as the psyche's movement toward integration, where unresolved emotions continue, seeking recognition until they are consciously understood. The more meaningful the relationship was, the more difficult it becomes for the unconscious to simply erase its emotional imprint. This explains why certain people remain psychologically present long after physical distance has separated them. The mind preserves experiences that contributed to one's identity, and when those experiences disappear without emotional closure, they continue influencing perception in subtle but persistent ways. A man may suddenly compare new conversations with those he once had with you, notice qualities in others that remind him of your presence, or find himself measuring ordinary moments against memories he thought he had left behind. He may not even recognize that these comparisons are taking place because they occur beneath conscious awareness. That is precisely what makes them significant. Genuine longing rarely begins with dramatic gestures. It begins with an involuntary shift in attention. Every unexpected memory, every unexplained curiosity, and every recurring thought becomes evidence that the emotional connection has not been fully resolved. This is also why attempts to suppress these thoughts often produce the opposite effect. The harder someone tries not to think about a meaningful person, the more frequently the unconscious introduces subtle reminders, creating a cycle that feels impossible to control. Jung understood that psychological resistance often strengthens the very emotions we hope to escape. Instead of disappearing, they become woven into daily life through seemingly insignificant moments that quietly accumulate over time. Eventually, the person realizes that what they considered a passing memory has become a constant psychological companion. Yet this first sign is only the beginning. Attention alone does not fully expose the depth of his emotions. There is another behavior, far more revealing, that begins to reshape the way he sees himself. Without realizing it, the person he misses starts influencing his decisions, his emotional reactions, and even the image he wants the world to see. It is this transformation, hidden beneath everyday behavior, that reveals how deeply someone can continue loving in complete silence. And that is where Jung's understanding of the human psyche becomes even more fascinating. He begins changing without fully understanding why. One of Carl Jung's most profound observations was that meaningful relationships do more than create memories, they shape identity. Every deep emotional bond leaves an imprint on the psyche, influencing how a person understands themselves and the world around them. When that bond is suddenly interrupted, the unconscious does not simply mourn the absence of another person. It begins questioning the version of the self that existed within that relationship. This is why a man who truly misses someone often starts changing in unexpected ways, even when he has no intention of winning that person back. At first, these changes appear practical. He becomes more disciplined, more focused on work, more committed to personal goals, or more interested in improving his physical health. To everyone around him, it looks like personal growth. Yet beneath that visible progress often lies a quieter psychological motivation. The loss has forced him into an encounter with himself. Jung believed that emotional pain has a unique ability to expose parts of our personality that remain hidden during comfortable periods of life. Instead of merely missing another person, he begins confronting questions he had successfully avoided for years. Was he emotionally available enough? Did fear prevent him from expressing what truly mattered? Did pride speak louder than honesty? These questions rarely arrive as clear thoughts. They emerge gradually through restlessness, self-reflection, and an unusual desire to become someone stronger than the person he believes allowed the connection to fade. This is not always driven by guilt. More often, it reflects the psyche's natural movement toward psychological completion. Every significant relationship acts like a mirror, revealing strengths as well as emotional blind spots. When that mirror disappears, the mind instinctively tries to understand what it has lost, not only in another person but within itself. As this process unfolds, he may become unusually interested in books, philosophy, psychology, or experiences that encourage deeper self-awareness. He starts searching for answers that have little to do with the outside world and everything to do with his inner life. Even if he never mentions your name, your absence has become the catalyst for a transformation he cannot easily explain. Ironically, the more he evolves, the more clearly he recognizes the emotional significance of the person who unknowingly initiated that change. Jung often emphasized that true transformation begins when we stop escaping the unconscious and begin listening to it. For many men, missing someone deeply becomes the first moment they genuinely hear that inner voice. It interrupts routines, challenges old beliefs, and forces an uncomfortable but necessary confrontation with their emotional reality. This is why some men become quieter after loss rather than louder. They are no longer fighting another person. They are wrestling with themselves. And while this internal transformation remains invisible to most people, it produces subtle external signs that attentive observers can recognize. Yet perhaps the most revealing moment has not happened yet. There comes a stage when memories stop appearing by accident and begin shaping his everyday emotional state. At that point, missing someone is no longer an occasional feeling. It becomes a silent presence influencing nearly every decision he makes. And that is the psychological shift we will uncover in the next part. His emotions begin escaping through indirect actions. Carl Jung argued that the unconscious mind is incapable of remaining silent forever. What we refuse to express directly eventually finds another route into our behavior, often in ways so subtle that we mistake them for coincidence. This is why a man who deeply misses someone may never openly confess his feelings. Yet his actions begin revealing what his words continue to conceal. He may tell himself that the chapter is over, but his unconscious has not accepted that conclusion. Instead, it starts influencing his choices in quiet, almost invisible ways. He becomes unexpectedly curious about your life, not because he has planned to be, but because emotional significance naturally draws the mind's attention. He may pause when he hears your name, remember details that once seemed unimportant, or find himself wondering how you would react to moments in his own life, even when he avoids reaching out. An internal conversation often continues, replaying unfinished discussions, imagined responses, or opportunities he wishes he had handled differently. Jung believed that unresolved emotional experiences remain psychologically active until they are consciously integrated, and this explains why certain people continue occupying our inner world long after they have disappeared from our daily lives. The conscious mind insists on moving forward, while the unconscious quietly revisits what still carries emotional meaning. As this inner conflict grows, it begins influencing the way he interacts with the outside world. Friends may notice that he appears distracted, unusually reflective, or emotionally distant without understanding the reason. He may become less interested in superficial conversations because his attention is increasingly absorbed by deeper questions about connection, regret, and personal meaning. Sometimes he catches himself searching for familiar qualities in new people, only to realize that what he is truly searching for cannot be recreated through comparison. The unconscious is not looking for a replacement. It is searching for resolution. This distinction is essential because many people misunderstand emotional longing as simple attachment, when in reality it often reflects the psyche's attempt to make sense of an experience that fundamentally changed it. Jung observed that every meaningful relationship leaves behind psychological symbols, shared places, conversations, routines, and emotions that become woven into the fabric of memory. Encountering these symbols unexpectedly can trigger feelings with surprising intensity because they activate emotional networks that never fully disappeared. A single melody, a familiar scent, or an ordinary location can momentarily dissolve months of emotional distance, reminding him that certain parts of the past remain alive within him. These reactions are rarely deliberate. They emerge before logic has time to intervene, exposing truths that the conscious mind would rather keep hidden. Eventually, this silent emotional pressure reaches a point where it can no longer remain confined to memory alone. It begins changing not only what he thinks about, but also what he values, what he fears losing, and what he wishes he had understood sooner. And that is where the psychology becomes even more revealing, because the next sign is not about memory or attention. It is about regret, the powerful emotion that forces a man to confront the difference between what he chose in the past and what he now realizes truly mattered. When regret becomes impossible to ignore. Carl Jung believed that one of the most transformative moments in a person's life occurs when the unconscious brings hidden truths into conscious awareness. Until that moment, people often explain their choices through logic, pride, or circumstance. But once genuine self-awareness begins, those explanations gradually lose their power. This is where deep regret often emerges, not as punishment, but as a psychological signal that the individual has started seeing the past with greater honesty. For a man who truly misses someone, regret rarely appears all at once. It develops quietly, growing stronger as emotional distance gives him a clearer perspective on what the relationship actually meant. While he was living inside the experience, he may have focused on disagreements, misunderstandings, or personal frustrations. Time, however, changes the way memory organizes itself. The unconscious slowly separates temporary conflicts from lasting emotional value, allowing him to recognize what was genuinely important. He begins realizing that certain moments he once considered ordinary were, in fact, the foundation of a meaningful connection. Conversations he barely appreciated now carry unexpected significance. Acts of kindness he overlooked begin returning to his memory with remarkable clarity. Even silence shared together can suddenly feel more valuable than countless conversations with people who never understood him in the same way. Jung observed that psychological growth often requires confronting the difference between what we believed we wanted and what we truly needed. This realization is rarely comfortable because it forces the individual to acknowledge not only external circumstances, but also personal responsibility. A man may recognize that fear prevented vulnerability, that pride replaced honest communication, or that emotional avoidance created distance where openness might have preserved the relationship. These insights cannot be blamed on fate or coincidence. They emerge from a deeper encounter with the self, where excuses gradually give way to understanding. Yet regret is not merely about wishing the past had unfolded differently. Its deeper purpose is to transform awareness. Jung saw emotional pain as a potential guide, rather than an enemy, capable of revealing aspects of the personality that remain hidden during easier times. If approached with honesty, regret becomes the beginning of maturity instead of a permanent emotional burden. It teaches that meaningful relationships cannot survive on unspoken feelings alone, and that genuine connection requires courage as much as affection. At this stage, whether he reaches out or remains silent, something fundamental has already changed within him. He no longer remembers you simply as a person from his past. He recognizes you as someone who influenced his psychological development in ways he failed to understand before. The experience has become part of his identity, shaping how he approaches trust, intimacy, and emotional honesty in the future. This inner realization leads to the final and most important lesson in Jungian psychology. The greatest question is not whether someone misses you, but what that longing ultimately teaches them about themselves. In the final part, we will explore why Jung believed that every profound emotional connection serves a higher psychological purpose, and why the deepest form of love is inseparable from the journey toward self-understanding. The truth he can no longer escape. As we reach the end of this journey, one question remains: what happens when a man can no longer outrun the emotions he has spent so much time trying to silence? Carl Jung believed that the greatest psychological burden is not emotion itself, but the refusal to consciously face it. The unconscious is remarkably patient. It allows a person to hide behind routines, achievements, distractions, and even new relationships for a time. Yet it continues moving quietly beneath the surface until what has been ignored demands recognition. This is why genuine longing eventually reaches a turning point. A man who truly misses someone does not remain psychologically unchanged forever. Sooner or later, he realizes that what he has been fighting is not another person but his own unresolved inner reality. He begins to understand that the memories returning again and again were never random, that the unexpected moments of sadness were never signs of weakness, and that the emotional space left behind could not simply be replaced by staying busy. Instead, they were invitations from the unconscious to acknowledge something real. Jung often described psychological growth as the courage to confront the hidden parts of ourselves, rather than continuing to deny them. For many men, missing someone deeply becomes the beginning of that confrontation. They recognize how pride prevented honesty, how fear disguised itself as emotional control, and how silence often protected the ego, while slowly distancing them from genuine connection. This realization is not always comfortable. In fact, it can be one of the most painful experiences a person faces because it requires accepting responsibility, not only for what happened, but also for what remained unsaid. Yet this is also where true transformation begins. When emotions are finally acknowledged instead of suppressed, they stop controlling behavior from the shadows. Whether he chooses to reconnect, sincerely apologize, or simply carry the experience forward as wisdom, he is no longer being directed by unconscious conflict. He is making conscious choices. That is the difference. Jung believed separates emotional avoidance from psychological maturity. It is important to remember, however, that not every man who misses someone will return, and not every return is proof of lasting love. Missing someone reveals emotional significance, but healthy relationships require something more: mutual honesty, emotional responsibility, respect, and the willingness to communicate openly. Longing alone cannot rebuild what trust, understanding, or timing have broken. Real love is measured not only by what someone feels in private, but by what they are prepared to do with those feelings in reality. Perhaps the deepest lesson in Jung's psychology is that every meaningful relationship first teaches us about ourselves. The people who leave lasting marks on our lives become mirrors, revealing our fears, our desires, our strengths, and the parts of our personality still waiting to be understood. Sometimes they remain with us, and sometimes they become the experience that awakens us to a deeper level of self-awareness. In either case, the encounter changes us forever. So, if you have ever wondered whether a man can hide the fact that he misses someone deeply, the answer is more complex than a simple yes or no. He may hide his words. He may hide his intentions. He may even convince himself that he has moved on. But the unconscious has its own language, one expressed through attention, transformation, memory, emotional conflict, and the quiet search for inner wholeness. Those who understand this language no longer judge people only by what they say. They begin noticing what their behavior consistently reveals. And perhaps that is Carl Jung's most enduring insight. The deepest truths of the human heart are rarely announced. They are lived, often long before they are ever spoken.